Switzerland has over 370,000 bunkers with room for every single citizen and then some. Hard to swallow, right? You probably know the country for its snow-capped mountains, melting chocolate, and beautiful villages. It looks like a postcard. But look a little closer. That old barn on the side of the cliff? There's a cannon behind its wooden walls. That boulder along the forest trail? It's a hollowed-out lookout post. And the apartment building you just walked past? There's a steel blast door hiding a room built to survive nuclear strikes. But why? Why does one of the world's most peaceful and neutral countries have an underground city hiding beneath it? And what's actually inside, and why nobody's talking about it? Let's find out. To answer these questions, we have to go back to where this whole thing started. The summer of 1940. World War II was barely a year old, and Hitler's Germany had just done something that should have taken years, and instead took only 6 weeks. It knocked France completely out of the war. It was one of the strongest allies. The French army, which had spent 2 decades preparing for exactly this kind of fight, collapsed faster than almost anyone predicted. And when France went down, Switzerland found itself boxed in on every side. Nazi Germany to the north and east, Fascist Italy to the south, German-occupied France to the west. Wherever you pointed on the map, it was Axis territory. And right in the Axis grip sat Switzerland. Now, Switzerland, at the time, was a country of about 4 million people, with no navy, and an army that looked modest, next to the army that had just flattened its much larger neighbors. Farmers, bank clerks, school teachers, men who'd never fired a shot, were suddenly being issued ammunition and sent to dig in along borders that, on a map, looked almost impossible to hold. Most countries cornered like that had exactly 2 options: fight and probably lose, or surrender and hope for mercy. Switzerland picked a third option nobody quite expected. It didn't fight at the border, and it didn't surrender. It pulled back into the mountains and dared anyone to come in after it. But this wasn't a desperate last-minute retreat. It was part of a brilliant strategy designed by one man. His name was General Henry Guisan. Born in 1874 in the canton of Vaud, he'd been Switzerland's commander-in-chief since 1939. And when France collapsed, he reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Defending Switzerland's borders the old way was pointless now. With enemy territory on every side, there was nowhere to fall back to except the only place left: the Alps themselves. By July 12, 1940, the Guisan Plan was finalized. The plan was simple and brutally realistic. Most of the army would pull back out of the lowland cities and valleys, retreat deep into the mountains. There, they would fortify their positions and hold out for as long as necessary. And they would be ready to blow up vital tunnels and bridges to make the country ungovernable to any invader. Food, ammunition, and supplies would also be stockpiled for an indefinite siege. There was no plan B, no clause about surrender. The order itself wasn't meant to inspire anyone. It was a practical blueprint, detailing where troops would go, what they would take with them, and how the country intended to survive. The inspiring part came 2 weeks later. On July 25th, Guisan summoned every officer in the Swiss army ranked major or higher to the Rittli Meadow. Now, this wasn't just any field. It was the same ground where, according to Swiss tradition, the founding cantons had sworn their oath to defend each other. Just picture the scene: hundreds of officers in full uniform, standing in open grassland, surrounded by the same Alpine peaks they were preparing to retreat into. Behind them, 6.5 centuries of history. Ahead of them, a war that had already swallowed most of Europe. Guisan hadn't chosen the place by accident, and he wasn't there to reveal a new strategy. The plan already existed on paper. What he wanted, standing in that meadow, was something far less abstract than strategy. He wanted every man there to understand, personally and unmistakably, that Switzerland was not going to fold. His message was blunt. If word ever came that Switzerland had surrendered, treat it as enemy propaganda. Not a rumor, not confusion. Propaganda. Because here, surrender wasn't even a decision one person could make. Power was split across the cantons, authority was deliberately fragmented, and no single leader held the kind of absolute control that could hand the nation over, not even under pressure. Meanwhile, across the border, German military planners had drawn up a real invasion plan for Switzerland. It was called Operation Tannenbaum, Fir Tree, with German divisions pushing toward Geneva and Lucerne, while Italian troops came up through the Alps from the south. On paper, it existed. In reality, it never moved beyond a folder on a shelf. Historians still argue over why it was never carried out. There is no record of a single decisive moment, no memo where Hitler weighs Switzerland and chooses to look away. But there is something else we do know. Swiss engineers had quietly turned the country's geography into leverage. The Gotthard and Simplon tunnels, the main arteries connecting Germany and Italy, were packed with demolition charges, ready to bring the mountain down the moment a German soldier crossed the border. For any invading force, the math was brutal. Months of grinding mountain warfare in exchange for rubble and a country with nothing valuable left to take. Whatever combination of hesitation, strategy, or distraction kept the German army from crossing that line, Switzerland had already made one thing clear. If you come in, you don't inherit the country. You inherit what is left of it. Of course, none of this would have been possible without a century of experience carving into mountains. By the 1800s, Swiss engineers were already tunneling through solid rock to build railways across the Alps. When the rail projects ended, that expertise shifted to defense. Artillery bunkers were drilled directly into cliff walls, hidden so well that from a distance they blended into the rock itself. Fake Alpine chalets concealed gun positions, and even fighter jets were hidden inside mountain hangars. And across the valley, engineers planted long rows of jagged concrete pyramids. These are now known as Toblerone lines, named after the famous chocolate. Now, this entire strategy was built to stop tanks and soldiers. About 20 years later, the threat changed shape completely. World War II ended, and the mountain fortresses had done their job. But then came a new kind of war, one that the rock bunkers were never built for. One where you don't see an army crossing the border at all. One where a single weapon could erase an entire city in seconds. So Switzerland adjusted again. In 1963, a new law came into force, simple, absolute, and impossible to opt out of. Every new residential building had to include a fallout shelter in its basement, no exceptions. If a building couldn't fit one, its owner paid into a fund that built a shared shelter nearby instead. Either way, the shelter got built. Now, just imagine yourself in that system for a moment. You're not just building a house anymore. You're choosing tiles and paint and maybe a view from the kitchen window. But at the same time, you're also pouring a reinforced concrete room underground, fitting it with a heavy steel door and stocking it with bunk beds. Within a generation, this became as routine and unremarkable as wiring a house for electricity. Decade after decade, basement by basement, that law quietly did its work. Today, Switzerland has enough underground shelter space for nearly its entire population, with capacity left over. No other country on Earth can say that. So what does all of that actually look like down there? Let's start small, with the kind of shelter sitting under an ordinary house. You step through a heavy steel door built to survive a blast wave. Inside, it's quite Spartan. Simple bunk beds, a dry toilet, and an air filtration system that scrubs out radioactive dust and chemical agents, with a hand crank built in for when the power grid is down. It's not comfortable, and it doesn't need to be. It just has to keep a family alive for a few weeks. Step inside one that hasn't been touched in years, and the air is exactly what you'd expect. Cool, faintly metallic, and quiet enough that you notice your own breathing. Now scale that up. One of the largest privately built bunkers in the country, tucked into the Bernese Highlands, has stopped being a bunker in any normal sense and become something closer to an underground town. Miles of internal corridors, hundreds of beds, an operating room, and even its own post office. Walk far enough through it, and you could plausibly forget you're underground at all. Until you remember there's no way out except the way you came in. And then there's the most famous one of all, the Sonnenberg, in Lucerne. In the 1970s, the city needed a new motorway tunnel anyway, so engineers built one that could double as the largest civilian fallout shelter on the planet, sealed behind blast doors as heavy as a loaded freight car. But there were some issues. It was both impossible to close those massive doors and set up the 20,000 beds within a reasonable time. So the shelter's official capacity quietly dropped from 20,000 people to 2,000. Today, you can actually tour it as a museum. But here's the detail that's easy to miss in all of this. Almost none of these spaces sit empty. On an ordinary day, they're wine cellars, storage rooms, laundry spaces, because the whole system isn't designed to sit there looking ready all the time. It's designed to become ready fast the moment it's actually needed. There's one more piece to this system, and it's arguably the most important one. The bunkers were never meant to defend Switzerland by themselves. Switzerland has compulsory military service for men, and until 2007, soldiers kept their gear, including fully automatic rifles, at home, meaning large numbers of trained personnel could be mobilized within hours, if needed. That's where an old saying comes from: Switzerland doesn't have an army. Switzerland is an army. It's a clever line, but it's also surprisingly literal. Your neighbor mowing his lawn down the street, the accountant riding the train to work, the shop owner unlocking a storefront in the morning. Any of them could be a trained reservist who knows exactly where to report if the call ever comes. When you put all of it together, the hidden fortresses in the mountains, the nationwide shelter network, the citizen soldiers ready to mobilize, you end up with something remarkable. One of the most comprehensive national defense systems ever built. Which brings us back to the question we started with. If Switzerland has hundreds of thousands of bunkers, why does almost nobody talk about them? Well, part of the answer is that they're not supposed to be noticed. A bunker disguised as a barn only works if people believe it's a barn. The whole point of hiding a bunker inside a boulder is that hikers walk straight past it without a second glance. The entire philosophy behind many of Switzerland's defenses is visibility through invisibility, hiding military infrastructure so thoroughly that it becomes part of the landscape itself. But secrecy is only part of the story. There's also Switzerland's image. To the rest of the world, Switzerland is known for neutrality, banking, luxury watches, and ski resorts. It's the country that stays out of conflicts, not the country preparing for them. And a vast underground defense network doesn't really fit that reputation, so it rarely becomes part of the conversation. So, there are no grand unveilings, no ribbon cuttings, no dramatic announcements. A new shelter is treated less like a military project and more like a building regulation, filed away alongside fire codes, zoning requirements, and plumbing permits. And then there's the simplest explanation of all. For decades, there was nothing happening. No invasion threats, no Cold War panic, no reason for most people to think about the bunker beneath their apartment building. By the end of the Cold War, a lot of Swiss people had started asking the same question. What exactly are we still preparing for? The threat of nuclear war seemed to be fading. Europe was at peace, and scattered across Switzerland were thousands of shelters, bunkers, and mountain fortresses built for a conflict that never came. The military started retiring some of its old defensive positions. Massive underground fortresses found unexpected second careers, as data centers, mushroom farms, cheese aging facilities, even hotels hidden inside mountains. In 2010, the country's defense minister at the time, Ueli Maurer, said it plainly. The threats these bunkers were built for didn't really exist in the same way anymore, and a lot of the old equipment inside them wouldn't stay useful for more than another decade or two. For a moment, it looked like the bunker era was coming to an end. Then came February 24, 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine, and almost overnight, a system many people had stopped thinking about became relevant again. Civil protection offices across Switzerland began receiving phone calls from ordinary people asking where their shelter was and whether it was actually ready to use. Officials described a sudden surge of interest. People wanted addresses, instructions, capacity numbers. They wanted to know exactly where they would go if the unthinkable happened. In some buildings, that meant for the first time in decades, shelter doors were being opened. Behind them were bunks covered in dust, rooms filled with storage boxes, old suitcases, bicycles, and other equipment that had quietly accumulated through years of peace. Some of these calls even came from across the border, from France, from people hoping Switzerland's famous shelter system might have room for them too. Well, it didn't. The network was built for Swiss residents, and every available space was already accounted for. Then came another shift. By September 2023, the Swiss military stopped selling off old bunkers and folded them back into long-term defense planning. In late 2024, the government set aside roughly 220 million Swiss francs to modernize the network, citing both the war in Ukraine and a more unstable world in general. The checks have gotten stricter too. In the village of Berkshire, a routine inspection found a shelter under an apartment block with a broken door and a blocked escape route. Under Swiss law, the owner now has a year to fix it, or pay a fine for every resident left without a backup shelter. Across the country today, the bunkers are quietly being checked, repaired, and brought back online. It's not just Switzerland paying attention to this anymore. Across Europe, governments have started taking a fresh look at civil defense. Germany is reassessing its own public shelter systems. Norway is studying the Swiss approach. Romania is building new bunkers near its border with Ukraine. It's tempting to write this whole story off as a special case, a small, wealthy, mountainous country with a history nobody else can copy. Well, there's truth in that. But the most revealing part of this story isn't the bunkers themselves. It's what happened when people suddenly needed them. In 2022, no new shelter law was passed. No massive construction program was announced. What changed was far simpler. Thousands of ordinary people picked up the phone and asked a question. If something happens, where do I go? And across Switzerland, local authorities already had an answer, because somebody, decades earlier, had already built one. Historian Sylvia Berger-Zioden has described this as a kind of shelter mentality, a habit woven into Swiss society over generations. Not fear, not paranoia. Just the quiet assumption that preparing for a worst-case scenario is easier than scrambling after it arrives. And maybe that's the real reason so few people outside Switzerland ever notice this system. Right now, most of those 374,000 bunkers are holding nothing more than wine bottles, just like any ordinary basement. But if Switzerland ever needed them again, if the warning ever comes, if the world suddenly changes, 5 days is all it takes. Thanks for taking the ride with us. And if you enjoyed uncovering one of the world's most overlooked defense systems, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.